and we're going to have a conversation with Vickie Landeche. And so we asked the question, what are some of the biggest pain points that you have when procuring IT professional services or with the implementation of a managed service? So in this segment, we're going to discuss these pain points and what can be done about them. So please welcome Vickie Landeche. Vickie is the Vice President of PMO and Delivery Operations here at InterVision. Her career spans a wide variety of industries, from environmental consulting and IT project management to professional services, implementation, and delivery. So Vickie, welcome.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm so excited to be here, and I really hope that I'm able to provide some valuable insights and solutions to some of the challenges that we face with service providers.
Well, we polled many of clients, potential clients, and people that work with professional services all the time, and that many have experienced pain in their relationship with those professional service providers. And one of the most common pain points that we hear about is lack of alignment between the provider's solutions and the client's business needs. What are some of the causes of this lack of alignment that you've seen in your career?
So that's a great question. So alignment between both parties is critical. I mean, it's critical for the success of any engagement. So there may be several causes for the lack of alignment, and just a few of them. So inadequate communication. So if a client's needs are not communicated effectively to the provider, then there will be a lack of understanding of what the desired outcome actually looks like. So the provider may not be aware of the business goals, processes, or even constraints. So that will lead to a mismatch in the solution that they're providing. Could be an insufficient analysis. So if the provider hasn't conducted a thorough analysis of the requirements, the result is the provider doesn't fully understand the client's current IT environment or their needs, any challenges that they're facing, or even the critical business objectives. Another item could just be lack of expertise. So if your provider doesn't have the necessary expertise or experience on their bench to provide the solution, then that lack of experience, of course, is just going to not be able to develop a tailored solution that the client's looking for. So, you really need a strong technical knowledge there. One that is probably harder to identify is misaligned incentives. And that could be a provider that has incentives that, of course, are not aligned with the client's business needs. So for example, maybe they're focused on selling a particular product. They're incentivized to sell a certain product or a certain solution or service rather than really looking for a solution that best fits the overall business outcomes for their client. Another area would be flexibility. So if a provider has a rigid approach to solution development, this can limit their ability to create a solution that will meet the needs. So that inflexibility will result in a solution not aligned to any objectives. So really, to avoid the lack of alignment, it's essential to engage in open communication. You need to conduct thorough requirements analysis. You need to confirm the provider has the necessary expertise, that they're flexible, and that they're listening. So we actually solved this issue with something that I call a meeting of the minds. So we pulled together a team that includes the pre and post sales staff. So our team will meet with the client to understand the business, their objectives, critical constraints. Maybe there's a time constraint. We'll gather requirements. We're going to look at current state. We're going to look at future state. And then we'll complete an analysis. And we're going to work to provide a complete solution. So that solution will not only answer today's issues, but it will also be flexible to allow for changes, provide, options for growth. So we're going to look to work and partner with the client to address today's issues. And then, of course, we're proactively planning for tomorrow's challenges.
So when you've walked into some situations that maybe were already a little bit off the rails, so to speak, what are some of the results that you've seen of this misalignment between the provider and the client? What what are some war stories without sharing company names? But what are some things that you've seen, Vickie?
Some of the things we've seen is the solution was so far off base with the customer's requirements that they had poor business performance. Their costs increased greatly, and the costs had increased greatly because the mark was so totally missed that the project had to be reworked. I mean, it was basically scrapping the entire implementation and starting over. So that, of course, causes delays. It causes an impact to the business. You even impacting revenue streams. The employees are frustrated. Um, you're building trust because the previous provider has messed this situation up so badly that they're looking at you like, okay, we really don't know if you can even pull this off.
Yeah.
So it's a very difficult and challenging situation to be in. Um, but I would definitely say the rebuild was probably the worst I've seen with a misalignment.
Yeah, where you have to just completely scrap what's been
Yes.
done and then roll it out. I can remember as CIO one time, and I won't name names of where I worked or the vendors involved, but I kept getting project status reports every week, and everything was green, green, green. And we were just a couple of weeks from go live, and all of a sudden everything turns red. And it's like, what happened? And both my team and the vendor solution provider kept what they said was we kept thinking we could get it back on track. We kept thinking we could get it back on track. And it's like, holy cow, I can't do anything about it now than to call a timeout. So I'm sure our viewers today, our participants, probably have a lot of war stories on their own. Let's back up in the process a little bit, and when our attendees are trying to find the solution providers, what are some questions that you think they should be asking you to help prevent this misalignment from even starting?
Oh, there's several, so I'll just name a few, but one would be how do you ensure that you understand our business requirements? And to take that a step further, how will you communicate and demonstrate that you understand our requirements? Because obviously we need to be confident in the solution. So how will you communicate and demonstrate that? Communication is ultimately the key, and I can't stress enough, communication is so important to deliver any solution, and both sides have to be on the same page. Some of the other questions, how do you incorporate our feedback? How do you make adjustments? So as we move along, and maybe there was a gap that was missed, but as we move along and we identify that gap, how do we make adjustments to ensure that that final solution will align with requirements? Ask for examples of previous projects that are similar to what you're trying to accomplish. And you also want to confirm that the team has the expertise. So dive into what the team looks like. Ask for, you know, certifications, years of experience, really how deep does their technical knowledge go? Now, how do you measure success? How are you going to safeguard that you're going to align with our needs at the end of this? The other part, again, communication. You know, what kind of reporting and communication process do you have in place? You need to be informed. As you just said, Jeff, you're going along in the project and, you know, everything looks great. We're going to make it 2 weeks, from the finish line, and now everything's red. And the project's going to come to practically a screeching halt. So you want to understand the communication process that the provider has in place so you can prevent those misalignments.
Well, and you do talk a lot about communication, and communication is so key. Jonathan even talked about it in his opening remarks yesterday. Um, it leads to this misunderstanding and, frankly, a lack of trust. So, how can our IT leaders out there ensure the provider they are hiring excels at communication? What are some things they should be looking for?
So I would say some of the things you need to do early on in your selection process. So the provider selection process, Some of the ways to evaluate their communication skills, again, ask for references. So go talk to some of the clients that they've worked with, and you can get a feel for how they communicate and what their communication style is. You can also inquire about what technologies do they leverage to communicate. So we need to be on the same page. So you would want to hear that they are using project management software, that they have collaboration tools, and how are they going to use those in this particular project? And I think the most important thing is a communication plan. So ask if they have a communication plan. And the key items you want to hear is they should tell you who is responsible for communication on both sides. You know, what does that frequency look like? The context and the format. So that will help that the communication is regular and structured. So good communication, it has to be structured delivery. It needs to provide the critical information such as budget tracking, progress timelines, all of those things that we look for in a successful project. And I have to tell you, early on in my career, one of my mentors um, said, you know, Vickie, bad news does not age well. It doesn't get better with time. So if it is, you know, news, I mean, of course you need to keep everyone updated, but that bad news or delays or issues and risks, they have to be delivered as soon as possible. And I think one thing to keep in mind for a client or an IT leader is just remember that throughout the project, you're not always going to love to hear the news that your provider is going to give you, but it's important. So, you know, whether it's, you know, good or bad, you just need to trust them and trust that the information is accurate and timely. So uh, I feel that if providers are open and transparent and bring issues and bad news up quickly, that begins to build that trust.
Yeah. Well,
So
so part of the problem that we have though is this: you've got a sales team who they are sales professionals. They communicate well. They're able to really get in and understand what's going on with the client and communicate that they understand it. But then you have a handoff to the delivery team or the operational team. How do you make sure that the delivery team and the operational team have great communication? So what things do you do to help prevent those disconnects?
So one of the things is what we call a warm handoff. So with the warm handoff, of course, you have your sales team and your pre-sales team have probably been out speaking to clients. And at some point they go, all right, we have a pretty big solution here. So we need to pull in additional teams. So what the warm handoff does is it brings in the post-sales team, so the delivery team. And what we do is we get that team together. We bring them into the meetings with the client, like a workshop. So now your implementation team is involved in the solutioning process. So that is huge. It allows a different perspective because pre-sales team they're great, they're knowledgeable. Yes, they're technical. However, your delivery team, they're the ones in the trenches day in and day out, and they know what they've seen over the years. So in speaking about a solution, they have a different perspective. They're going to ask different questions, and they're going to dig deeper into what the topology looks like, what's going on in that current environment. So they are going to identify risks that maybe the sales and the pre-sales team hasn't thought of. So this just it further helps the solution, and with the client in the room, it also builds that trust that, hey, these guys actually know what they're doing. So with that, once the solution is developed, everyone has signed off on it. Now that transitions to that implementation team that was involved in the solution process. So there is no lost communication. And not that every implementation is going to go smooth, because they're not. There will be issues. But by doing a warm handoff, it definitely makes the implementation go smoother, and there is no loss of communication or information in that process.
What advice do you have for the attendees who may be right now in a project or in a relationship with a provider that just isn't communicating? What can they do?
I would recommend immediately addressing the issues with the communication. So you want to express your concerns about the lack of communication and then set clear expectations, just get it out in the room and say, moving forward, this is how we're going to communicate. So establish that communication plan if it has not been done. So again, you want to discuss frequency, format, and content, and make sure that that communication is delivering everything that you need. You'll want to follow up with them and just make sure that everyone is on the same page and the relationship's on track. I would say if it doesn't improve, you need to escalate. So that is an area I think that some clients, because I have been a client myself, you do hope it will improve and you do the gentle nudging and the pushing and asking for things to change. But if it doesn't, you really need to take that to a higher level of management and maybe even just consider terminating the relationship altogether, depending on where you are in the process.
Yeah.
Um, it's also a good time just to reflect on that experience. So if you are experiencing that, you can now take this experience and then, of course, develop ways to improve this for that next project that comes along and improve your selection process of your providers.
Have you seen from the client side, um, where they may be involved in this project that is off the rails a little bit and the communication's not well, that they bring their own communication plan and say, here's how we want to interact going forward, rather than relying on the provider. Have you seen that happen?
I have seen that happen. And that was actually in my environmental consulting days, working with some oil spill vendors. I absolutely have seen that happen.
Did that go over well? Did it
It,
help the problem,
it
solve the problem?
ultimately did. It's a tough conversation to have, and it's awkward, and they're taken back by, what do you mean we're not communicating? So it does it's a difficult conversation, but it can work, yes, and I have seen it work.
So other side of that coin, you mentioned, you said there will be issues. How do you, as the leader of the delivery teams and the implementation teams, how do you handle it when a customer comes to you with a problem, maybe their lack of communication? What actions do you take?
So at that point, obviously, if there's an issue, we're most likely at remediation plan. So for me as a leader, I need to then take the initiative, get everyone in a room on the providers team. This is the feedback that we're getting. Here's the plan, how we're going to address it, and this is how we're going to move forward. I am going to have another conversation, obviously, with the client and say, this is what we're doing to address the situation. And depending on your role, so for me, I would be participating in the implementation from that point forward. So I would be that little birdie in the back of the room, just sitting there and chiming in where necessary to just to make sure things stay on track. So I would be the individual that the client would come to if they still weren't happy. And then I would be pivoting and, addressing issues as we go forward.
So you would sit your team down and have that
Oh,
conversation and
absolutely.
then talk to the
Absolutely.
client and do that. Do you then bring everybody together and say, okay,
Yes.
folks, this is what we're doing moving forward?
Yes.
I,
You want to make
I
sure
love
everyone's on the same page and that everyone understands the issues and how we're going to correct.
that. I think that's great because that visibility and bringing someone like at your level into that. Do you find that when that happens, the client also brings in kind of that matching level so that the two of you are now paired at the hip, so to speak?
I have had that happen occasionally in my career, but for the most part, no. It's more of, okay, now the client's working with me no matter what level they are. So
Yeah.
I'm building that relationship
Okay.
and I'm building it at that level. But I have had, a CEO or, executive vice presidents come in. And what I have found, once you get that project back on course corrected and on the right path moving forward, they quickly drop out. So that level, does drop out. So now, of course, you're back with the original project sponsor.
Yeah.
So I find building that relationship is critical.
They feel comfortable that now things are back on track. Yeah. Well, another area that we hear a lot about, and I know this is an area that is near and dear to your heart, and that's project management. Missed deadlines, cost overruns, poor quality. How do you know the provider you are about to engage is good at project management?
So this is very true, Jeff. This is definitely near and dear to my heart. And I find that this is an area that most companies struggle with. Project management is tough. So I recommend that leaders actually ask some questions about the project management team. So some of the questions you'll want to ask is the project methodology. And does that align with your methodology? Is that align with what you think the solution provider should be doing? Because you want to make sure on the same method. If one's working waterfall method and you're expecting an agile method, I mean, we're in two different parks right now, right? You can have a hybrid method, and maybe that's where it comes together. You meet in the middle. Some things can be done agile, but most true gear implementation is going to be a waterfall method. There are things you can do, and we can call it agile, but that would be one thing. Ask about the methodology. Also, the experience of the team. What are their qualifications? Do they have certifications? I do feel certifications are important. I, however, chose to go get my certification much later in life. So it's not the end all be all, but you want to make sure that they've had years of project management experience. If you have a very large, complex project, certainly you want to make sure that your project manager has experience with that, because with the multi-complex projects you can have logistical issues, you have multiple engineers, your timelines could be tight. There's just a lot of issues that could happen if you're not on your project management game. Again, communication. So it just comes back to communication. So what does the communication plan look like for this particular project and with this project team? Maybe even ask for a sample or a template of what that communication plan looks like. Uh, Change management, that's something that's very important. But I think the most important question for me, and I would recommend that you ask, is risk management. Most PMs struggle with risk management. Uh, it's and it could be many different reasons. Maybe they're not comfortable working with the mitigation plan, but risk is so important. So I would be asking, what does your risk management process look like? How do you identify and assess? And then how do you communicate it? So they should have, the basic risk log. We should be identifying these as we go through the project, assigning who's responsible, what's the mitigation plan. And that is something I think probably where most projects fall is in the risk area.
Yeah. We could probably have a whole conversation on change management and risk management.
Yes.
We should do that sometime, Vickie. Maybe on the podcast, we'll have you come on and talk about that. I think that would be fascinating. Are there metrics that our attendees, our IT leaders should be asking of their partners and potential partners that would help them make a more informed decision?
Oh, there's several. I would say if you're looking at managed services, especially SLAs, what are their response time for critical issues? Available guarantees, is it within 1 hour? What does that look like? Key performance indicators, so satisfaction rates, first call resolution rates, even customer retention rates. You could ask about security metrics. What is their track record of preventing security incidents? And what's their compliance with industry standards? You could also ask about resources. How do they utilize their resources? What's their capacity utilization? What are their staffing levels? And if their staffing levels are full, do they have a network of other professional services providers that they bring in to supplement their bench?
Uh,
And how do they vet those? That's very important. Also, their approach to innovation and their track record on thought leadership.
I love the idea of making sure that they have a bench or they have resources to fill the bench, because that kind of leads into the last question here, Vickie, and that is the current market for IT talent. InterVision is known for having the top talent. That's really our differentiator, are the people and the skills that we can bring to the table. What do you look for when you're hiring for your team? Experience, certification, soft skills, technicals. What are you looking for to make sure that they are a differentiator and that they will differentiate InterVision for our clients?
So, of course, technical skills and experience is important, but I think you really have to look beyond that. And for me, there's a few that I really value. One is strong soft skills, or also known as those power skills. That's something that just can't be taught. You have it or you don't. And I find that those skills are just invaluable on a team. There's skills like communication, collaboration, problem solving, and leadership. So those are essential for effective teamwork. It helps builds positive team culture, and it's just great for building strong client relationships. One of the other ones would be continuous learning. So it's important for individuals to, not just show up and do work every day. Are they interested in learning more, learning new technology, keeping up? I mean, IT's fast paced. Are they keeping up with what's going on, all of the changes that are happening? And then I think the other one is a passion. So when you interview someone who's just excited to talk about it, just talk about the industry and what they're doing, that passion is just, I mean, you can't recreate that. Those individuals are just motivated, they're engaged, they'll be committed because they truly love what they're doing. So it's very important.
I love the soft skills. I love to call them essential skills. You called
Yeah.
them power skills. They really are so important to uh, IT professionals and consultants have to be able to communicate. That's kind of been our theme for our conversation today, Vickie, is communication.
Yes.
And that's a huge part of those soft skills, being able to communicate, collaborate, emotional intelligence. I think those are fabulous. So I want to ask before we close, any last comments that you might have for our attendees?
Again, I just say do your due diligence with your providers and your potential partners. Really dig into communication. What's that style? Are they the right fit for you? Do they have the experience, knowledge, and the bench to do what you're looking for? I think you really would want a strategic partner. You really don't want a transactional partner. You want to find someone who is in this for the long haul. They learn your environment, they understand your business inside and out, and they're going to be there for you and develop that roadmap that you'll need with your IT future.
Vickie, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. I've enjoyed our conversation. I enjoyed our conversations a week or so ago. If I could summarize this for our listeners, I would say communication is key, and that it's a two-way street, right? It takes both the client and the provider to communicate, and if you don't feel as the client that you're being kept in the loop or communicated properly, bring that up and bring it to the attention. And I love the E word that you threw out there, Vickie, which was escalate. Escalate to Vickie, and she will make sure that the communication happens. So, Vickie, thank you again very much. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you.